Hey, it's Baldy from Advrider, and this interview is a personal interest of mine because I always wondered as I watched the Round the World series, who was this badass director of photography who had special forces training and who interviewed Osama Bin Laden? He's so fascinating to me that I couldn't resist asking about things that didn't pertain directly to the Round the World series. So what I've done is broken down this interview into chapters. It's a YouTube feature where you can skip to the sections that really interest you. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did.
So now this should look fairly professional, right? I want to
pretty amazing machine, huh?
Oh, that's a Ural, the Russian.
Really cool.
Yeah, really cool.
Yeah.
The reason I have it is my dog, as you've seen wandering around here, likes to ride in the sidecar, and now we have grandkids, and they ride in the sidecar too with my wife on the back, so we can fit 3 grandkids in the sidecar. They're growing up, so maybe 2 in the future, and the dog in the lap, and my wife behind. So it's a lot of fun.
Where did you find it? How did you get hold of it?
Well, so I have a big motorcycle forum. I have this irrational passion for motorcycles, which you seem to share. And we started a sidecar, I think we call it a hack subforum, and I fell in love with them. I just saw the pictures and fell in love with them. And we had a Ural dealer close by, so I went down and looked at them and did an impulse buy, and that was probably 10 years ago, and I've loved it ever since.
And it's still rolling.
Still rolling, yeah, doing well.
I don't know whether you might be interested to do a little story on the Red Devil, which we used on the long way round. The little Russian bike we had in Mongolia.
Oh, yeah.
When my BMW broke down. Actually, it didn't really broke down. It just the brakes didn't work anymore, and it was just dirt in a little switch. Nothing major, but I could just quickly had to switch to another bike, and then I had this little Russian bike, 2-stroke, 125 cc.
Oh yeah.
And then we abandoned the bike in the British Embassy in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia. But then later I found out an Australian mining engineer, he bought it in a charity auction.
Oh, really? Wow.
So that bike is somewhere still alive, and he restored it, and he really looked after it very well.
So I have friends in the classic car, they collect classic cars and they enter them in various different shows, Pebble Beach, Concours, and things like that. Yeah. And the provenance is really important, whether the Kaiser of Germany owned it or whoever.
Yeah.
So I guess the provenance of your bike is so important because it was on the long way round and
exactly.
You used it. Yeah. So that's really great. But you got a sweet bike out of the deal, right? I've seen your Instagram photos and so on.
Yeah. No. Because at the time it was sponsored by BMW.
By BMW.
And then I could just have the bike at the end, which was, and it's still there. So I'm emotionally attached.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that's
it's
great.
It's nice. Yeah. And it still works very well. They had to fix quite a few things. Like all 3 bikes at the time had a problem with the frame. Just underneath the saddle, the frame broke because we had too much luggage at the back, and the leverage was too big, and so all 3 bikes had exactly the same problem, 2 very similar times, and then, for example, on long way down across Africa, same. We had 3 similar same bikes, and again they had all the same problems at the same time. So it was quite an amazing test. In Africa, it was actually the main problem were just the shock absorbers. We had to change them all the time. They just didn't like the the kind of the massive vibrations.
Yeah. With that load.
Yeah, and the corrugated, dirt
washboard roads. Yeah.
The washboard roads, it just killed it. Absolutely killed everything.
When you had the replacement bike for a while, was that when you crashed and hurt your rib?
Yes, yeah, as well. And it was very lucky on the long way round. It was much easier to be on these little small 125 2-stroke bikes
I'll
in
bet.
all the mud and all the swamps and the difficult terrain. It was, I could just waddle through, whilst Ewan and Charlie, they really struggled with the heavy, big BMW bikes. Generally, I think I was very lucky on all these trips, not having major. I never had major issues. Yes, we fell over a lot on the long way round, but then you're never fast. You're quite slow, so it's not a big deal. Oh, here is the puppy.
There's the puppy. He's a pretty big puppy. He's a very sorry about this. He's quite a curious dog.
Yeah, so very cool.
Before I put the AirPods on and he could hear your voice, he was barking and saying, "Who is that intruder? I've got to protect my master." I watched an interview with you and Charlie together with the Sidecar guys, and Charlie was dishing out some crap about your ability on a motorcycle. The story, the way he told the story is, we got this guy because he was so badass. He'd been to Afghanistan and a war journalist and the whole thing, and we knew he'd be tough enough for this.
But he doesn't know how to ride bikes.
That's basically what he said. He said when we went to apply for insurance, we asked him for his driver's license, and it turns out there was no notation for motorcycle license on your. So you had to go take the test, right?
Yeah, it's just that.
How many times did you take that test?
No, I'm sure I have a world record in failing motorbike tests. I'm definitely, because it's a kind of a silly story, a really stupid story, just problems with red tape. And so originally, of course, I grew up in Switzerland, and so at 18 you get your license to drive a car.
Yeah.
But I actually, at the time, I did straight away the truck license, because when you got the truck license, you had everything else for free. So you had the car and you had bikes and big bikes, everything. So that's what I had when I was 18. So that was 1980. And then 1990, I ended up in the UK and stayed in London. And then after 3 years, they force you to switch my Swiss license to a UK license. So then from 90 onwards, I had a UK license, but they didn't recognize everything from the Swiss license. So they just gave me car and little bikes up to 125 cc. And I didn't, I was bored and lazy, and I didn't really complain, because anyway, in London, I have just a little scooter. I don't need the big bike, so who cares? And the truck, I don't need either. So basically, I just didn't do anything about it. And then when the guys called for Long Way Round, 2004, there was a problem. Actually, my UK license didn't have the qualification for the big bikes. So I thought, okay, I quickly do the test. And I didn't have much time, because they only kind of hired me 2 weeks before departure. And so I said, okay, I can quickly book a test, and I do the license. But then, of course, I failed, because the typical thing, you drive, and when you do your indicators left and right, you don't turn your head enough. And, because in real life, you actually don't do it, because it's too dangerous. You keep your eyes straight, and you use your mirrors. But anyway, so I failed first time. Then you have to wait for 10 days to do it second time. So second time, they actually happened to fly me back from Czechoslovakia back to London to do the test. And fortunately, I managed. And it was only necessary. The guys could see I obviously know how to ride bikes, but it was a formality for the insurance. Yeah, you should have a license. They all said, who will ask you for your license when you're in Mongolia or Siberia? Nobody. So it didn't really matter for that. But anyway, I did the second time my test, and I passed. So I had a proper license. And we managed to get around the world, survived everything. And then in March 2005, back in London, I got flashed in the street, 3-lane street, middle of the night, totally empty, 30-mile zone, and I was driving 35 or something, or 38. And then you get flashed, and I get a letter in the post, £60 fine, and you get 3 points. So you here in Europe you can have 12 up to 12 points on your license, then you lose the license. And I said, okay, it's really annoying. I paid £60 and got my 3 points. And then a week later, the same story again. I get flashed again, not even with the bike. I was in the car. Same story, 30-mile zone, the middle of the night, nobody around, and I drive a little bit too fast, like 38. And second time, £60, 3 points. And then a few days later, I get a letter, your license is revoked. So what's going on? I thought there's kind of a mistake in the computer system. And so I called him up and said, no, you lost your license because you are a new driver. And new drivers, they lose the license if you have 6 points, not 12. So how can you say I'm a new driver? I had my license in Switzerland since 1980, and then since 1990 I had a license in the UK. Well, 93. It was 93 when they switched it to the UK license, and we are in 2005, and you are telling me because you did the first UK test in April 2004, and that's why you are a new driver. It's completely ridiculous, and the problem is. That Switzerland is not part of the European Union, and these kind of red tape situations they created it on purpose to force the Swiss. They have loads of problems like that, to kind of pressurize the Swiss to join the European Union. And so basically I just had and I was speaking to lawyers saying, look, this is completely ridiculous. But they said, you have no chance. You wouldn't even have a high court hearing in the UK complaining about this problem. And so I totally lost the license, everything. And then one lawyer, he said, the only case you could make out of it is a human rights case, because it's a human right that you have a right to work. And as a cameraman, I need a driving license, otherwise I can't work. And so he actually kind of compiled a case for the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg. But of course, there are just loads of cases like that, and they are, it's just piling up, thousands of them, and nothing ever happens. But effectively, I lost my license, no more license. I said, okay, I'm back on the bush bike. Pedaling is healthier than just being on the motorbike. And so I didn't care to have no license for a while. And then in 2007, suddenly the long way down story came up. And so they called up again, can you join us for the long way down, the African trip? I said, bloody hell, now I have this license problem again. I need to get my license back. And so, okay, I do the license again on the bike. So I go, I just had to do the practical one. No, I actually, at that time, I had to do everything, the series, everything, completely from scratch. And, driving around the cones and everything. And then I went to do the test. And so the instructor, he recognized me because of long way round. And he said, so what went wrong with you? What what happens? I said, look, I was unlucky. I was flashed. I got 6 points, and now I have to do it again. And so I go around. I felt everything is fine. And, I made sure I turned my head properly with indicating left and right. And so he told me, you failed. So that was my third test in the UK. And he said, why I failed. And he said, hesitant driving. And so what's
Failed because why?
hesitant driving.
Hesitant driving? I didn't know there was such a thing.
Yeah, I didn't know, but he said just hesitant driving. So that's why I failed. I said, bloody hell, what's going on? So then I had to book another test. Like you have to wait 10 days and you do another one. So my fourth test. And so I thought, okay, he said hesitant driving. So I was too slow. So maybe I just drive as I normally do, fast. And so I go and just drive normally as I always do. And I felt everything is fine. And he said, no, you failed again. So like the guy, he just like wanted to really.
That's so crazy.
It's crazy. So and the reason why did you fail again? It was aggressive driving.
Oh.
So that was my fourth test. And then I had to book another one. And like on the fifth test, I made it again. But I'm sure there's nobody in the world who actually drove around the world on a motorbike, but he's still failing his test. So it's
you not only drove around the world on a motorbike, you went to Afghanistan as this war journalist. You interviewed Osama Bin freaking Laden. And who does that? Are you the only guy who ever interviewed Osama Bin Laden?
There were a few other people as well who managed to do it. I think the very first one was Robert Fisk. He's a very well-known print journalist with lots of knowledge about the Middle East. So he was the first one, but then I was involved in the kind of the second interview, the first one for TV. So that was in November 96. So that was before 9/11. So only experts knew that this guy kind of is special, and you should watch him. But it started already. The trouble started already with attacks against American military installations in Saudi Arabia, and then attacks against American embassies in Tanzania. And so that was linked to the group around Bin Laden. And so at the time we did a story for Channel 4, UK channel. And it was...
It was amazing. So it started with you. So you grew up in Switzerland, and then you got military training. I haven't heard exactly what that military training was, but it sounds badass. What was it?
Yeah, everybody has to do military service in Switzerland. And so I thought if I already have to do it, you better try and do something where you learn some interesting skills. So I managed to get to the Mountain Grenadiers, which is like special forces in the mountains. And it was really interesting because you learn, all the survival skills, summer, winter, and then you have basically guerrilla warfare training. So you're trained to potentially operate behind enemy lines and do sabotage actions, blowing things up, destroying bridges, things like that. So we are trained with, explosives and all sorts of infantry weapons. And at the time in Switzerland...
Did that come in handy for...
Yeah. At the time when I did my military service in Switzerland, I didn't really, take it very seriously. I thought, the Swiss, what do they know about warfare? They haven't been in a war for a long time. They haven't been in the First World War, Second World War. And so I just thought it was good physical training. We had good friends. It was just fun. And but I didn't take it seriously. And then when I started my journalistic career as a documentary filmmaker in Afghanistan in '85, I went there for the first time. Suddenly I was the first time in a real war zone. And so that's when I suddenly realized that my training was very, very useful and really top quality. And it was perfect for my...
And you were shooting with a Super 8 camera, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You look quite legit there.
Exactly.
No wonder they hired you to go across the road of bones or whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, this Afghanistan experience at the beginning of my career was very good, because it was so crazy and so totally kind of a different world. It was just a perfect preparation for everything else, which was like much easier, and as well psychologically, this kind of war in Afghanistan was mad, totally crazy.
And some people say they were lucky to survive it or whatever. It sounded like, I don't know the details of the story, but it sounded like you really were lucky to survive it. The people you were covering got blown up just a day after you left, right, or something like that.
Yeah. It was pretty wild, because what happened at the time is, so you had the Soviets who invaded in 1979, and so I came in like 1985, so 6 years later. So they had already, for 6 years, they had a war. They had loads of refugees in Pakistan, loads of refugees in Iran, and you had a few foreigners kind of joining the Afghan side, the Mujahideens. And the way it worked, you flew to Pakistan and you had to go to Peshawar, like that frontier town close to the border with Afghanistan. And in Peshawar, you had all sorts of Mujahideen kind of militia groups and lots of refugees and aid organizations. And in Peshawar, you had to try and find connections with Mujahideen commanders. And so I was introduced to one of these groups, and then you just join them and they take you on board, and wherever they go, you go. And I didn't worry too much. I thought, look, they survived 6 years of war, so they must know what they were doing. But actually, it was completely chaotic and disorganized. And I ended up, the most dangerous situation was when they organized an attack against a Russian controlled road between Kabul and Jalalabad. They had, along the roads, they had like watchtowers to defend the road, to make sure they can spot like the Afghans organizing ambushes and things like that. And so I was in a group where the commander decided they want to attack one of these Russian posts to capture ammunition and weapon. And I thought, yeah, okay. Anyway, I had to go along with them. I had no choice. When you are with them, you're just with the group. You can't say, no, I'm kind of bailing out. So you're just part of the team. So I went along with them, and this attack was just a complete suicide mission. They were running against this post like lemmings. No, previous recognition to find out where the positions are. They were just running there, and then we ended up in minefields. So because of my training I had before, I could spot the minefields. I could see the tripwires, and I knew about the different types of Russian mines, tank mines, anti-personnel mines, all sorts of shit. And so I said, bloody hell, you have everywhere these tripwires, and they are just running. And so I just felt, I better stay carefully behind the guy in front of me, not too close, and watch very carefully where you step. And then it's just, after a while, the guy blew up, and one leg was ripped off, and then a few hours later he died. And it was something just silly. You could have avoided it. But they didn't care, because they believe in this idea: if you die in a war, fighting against the unbelievers, the communists, you will go to heaven, you will go to paradise. So they didn't worry too much. And it's probably, and even today, so many years later, Now, now they call themselves Talibans, but they are the same guys. Like at the time they were called Mujahideens. Now they are the Talibans. They're the same people, and the kind of warfare they are leading is still probably didn't change much. And the fact is this, there's no occupying force, no foreign army could ever control Afghanistan. So many tried, first the Brits and then the Russians, the Americans, everybody burns their fingers there. It's just, you can't do it because the country is so huge, it's really big, and there's hardly any infrastructure, just very few kind of tarmac roads. But like 95% of the country is just mountains, no infrastructure, no roads. And so local fighting forces like the Talibans, they can hide so easily in so many places you never find them. And so that's why foreigners just can't control that country. It's impossible.
Claudio, this is a story about you and not me. And so I don't want to get off on something I did very much, but I'll just say this short thing. I did a documentary film once for Stanford University. It was back in the days of Betacam SP. You would know what that is, with huge Ikegami camera on my shoulder. And it was in Israel and along the border with the Jordan River and so on. And one of the filming things required us to go into the demilitarized zone. And I was American, and the Israelis informed us no American had been there since 1948. And we're going to send the military with you, and you're going to step exactly where they tell you to step, because there's mines there. And I had personal escort with the military and everything. And the professor I was doing this for at Stanford, he had been in the Israeli army for 3 years as a paratrooper, so he knew what he was doing too. And they sandwiched me in the middle. And it was very unnerving because I'm trying to pay attention with the camera, but the Jordanians are on the hill on the other side of the river, and they have their tripod mounted machine guns with the big belts pointed at my chest. The whole time I was filming. My heart was crazy, but we survived. But I've heard of much worse. I've heard of a journalist who went to New Guinea and did a documentary over there, not Papua New Guinea, but the other side, and got flown in, but then the aircraft couldn't make it out or something, and had to survive in the jungle for 6 months. Is that a true story?
Yeah. That's another crazy story at the beginning of my career. That was in 1989, and I stumbled across this story. How can I explain it in a nutshell? It's complex.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting, I hope you don't mind me interrupting, but one of the things I think is interesting is your philosophy has been go to where you don't have much journalistic competition and where it's undercovered and the world needs to know. And that was one of those places, right? Because
I work since the beginning. I was always freelancer. So starting with Afghanistan, then I went to Afghanistan because at the time, media coverage was mainly about the liberation wars in Latin America, Nicaragua, El Salvador, places like that. And so all the major networks sent their people there, and you can't compete as a freelancer just on your own. You're too slow. So I always felt I need to go somewhere where you don't have competition, where there's there you can find interesting stories, but it's not covered. And so I stumbled about this story in Indonesia because after school, when I left school, I thought I want to do a kind of a bigger trip, backpacking trip abroad, outside Switzerland, outside Europe. And I had a school friend who said, you should go to Indonesia. It's an interesting place, interesting culture, and you should go as well to Irian Jaya. So that's the western part of New Guinea, which was it was occupied by the Indonesians in 1965, before it was a Dutch colony. But my friend said the main reason why you should go to New Guinea, you can two reasons. First, you can still find people living in Stone Age, and you can find butterflies, huge, massive, incredible butterflies. And I had no clue about butterflies, but I thought it's a pretty cool idea. Why not? And so he was collecting butterflies, and he explained me what to do and how to catch them and where to go. And he had maps and showed me exactly where you need to go. And it's a huge, like that part of New Guinea is like the size of Spain. It's huge. It's really massive land and huge mountains up to 5,000 meters. And it's jungle, it's tropical climate, so it's very difficult access. But I was excited, that was cool, trying to get to a really remote place. And so I had this strange idea of looking for butterflies, and I had maps, and I knew exactly where I needed to go in the jungle. But when I arrived at the main airport in the capital, Jayapura, at the airport, you have the custom guys, you have the police, and they ask you, you are a tourist, what do you want to do? And so I was totally naive at the time. I just came with my map and said, yes, I come here to look for butterflies. and then I just couldn't do anything because they completely, they watched me, and the only way how you could travel to these remote valleys with the butterflies was with kind of mission airplanes. That was the only way, but you needed police permits to kind of be on these planes, and I never got any permits. They completely blocked everything, and they just said there's one place you can go, is like the Wamene Valley, which is in the interior of the island. That's the only place where they send tourists, and everything else was blocked. And then I realized I was watched, like probably former East Germany with the Stasis, everybody getting a minder behind you. And that's how it was. I realized they are watching me everywhere, and I didn't get these police permits, so I was totally frustrated. I came back to Switzerland, no butterflies. But that actually triggered my interest in journalism. So that was my very first trip in 84, so before Afghanistan. So, but certainly I realized there are stories in the world where things are seriously going wrong, and we don't know about it. Absolutely no clue. And I started to read, because before I went, I studied all the travel guides, everything, and I had no information about kind of political tensions there. And so when I was back with no butterflies, I said, okay, I need to find out what's wrong, what's going on there. And so then suddenly I found a few months later a little agency article from, I think it was Reuters, mentioning a Swiss mission pilot in Irian Jaya who got kidnapped by a guerrilla organization. Said, that's it. There is somehow kind of a guerrilla war going on. And then later this Swiss pilot got released, and I managed to track him down when he was back in Switzerland. And through him, I started to hear the story, what happens in Irian Jaya, that Indonesia occupied side of New Guinea. And basically, he explained the story that there is an uprising from the local indigenous Papuans against the Indonesian occupation, and they effectively want to have independence. But nobody ever hears about it because there are so many interests from the rest of the world having good relations with Indonesia because it's strategically such an important country, lots of resources and so on, so that nobody wants to really talk about the dark side of Indonesia. And I felt, that's the story I need to tell. And then it took a while, so that this first trip was in 84, and then in 89 I managed to make a film about this. I think it was the first film about this guerrilla organization, the Papuans, trying to rebel against the Indonesians. And it was the Swiss pilot who got kidnapped. He agreed to fly me out because he actually was totally sympathizing with the Papuans. And so the question was how how to get there. So you could only have an illegal flight on a clandestine airstrip, because I could see before, the Indonesians would block you. Any official way through normal airports, they just block you, and you don't get anywhere. So the only option was to establish connections with the Papuans and convince them to build an illegal airstrip somewhere in the jungle and then fly there with the Swiss guy. And that's what we managed to do.
So you got in there with all your equipment, and pretty sophisticated equipment. I saw big things that you had. I guess they were waterproof enough so you could float through the river with them and everything. There's fantastic photos of you, which when I edit this, I'll paste in here. And but then you couldn't get out. You were in and you got the tapes, but you couldn't get out.
Yeah, it was quite a crazy operation. Again, my military training was very, very useful for this trip. I think this was probably the most extreme expedition I ever did in my career. It was really unbelievable. It was unbelievable, crazy stuff. And I was, lucky that I had some technology which just came out, which was crucial. So the one thing, this was before mobile phones. It was before internet. So communication was much more complicated. And I had shortwave amateur radio for my communication. And I thought I will have a connection, once I'm in the jungle, I thought I will have a connection with a guy in Darwin in Australia, north of Australia. And he was a sympathizer with the Papuan rebels, and he was prepared to kind of help me keep up the communication with the outside world. But that connection never worked because he was too close. Like shortwave radios at the time, they bounce off in the atmosphere and then they bounce down. And so if something is too close, then, the bounce doesn't work. So it basically, I never caught the guy in Darwin, but then by chance, I managed to catch a radio amateur in Tasmania, much further away, south of Australia. And I could recognize this guy was a Swiss guy, so I had the Swiss accent. And then I managed to catch him, with just tuning around different frequencies. So I got this guy and could talk to him in Swiss German, explain my situation, that I'm stuck in the jungle. And basically he agreed to help me to keep up the communication. And so that was one. The radio was good. And then I had the first generation of satellite navigation systems, the ones they had for yachts, for sailing yachts. And then you had to put up the antenna on the top of the masts, and then you had like a big box like this and 12-volt batteries to kind of run it. But it worked. I had one of these systems. Then I had for my whole charging, for cameras and that radio and the satellite system, I needed 12-volt batteries. So I had like motorbike batteries. And the other thing, solar panels, the first generation of solar panels to charge everything, because I knew I will be completely on my own in the jungle. And unfortunately, all that kit was working. And the camera was working because I had these like waterproof cases where, when it was tropical weather, really difficult, very humid, and it rained a lot. So it was important to keep all your electronic kit in watertight boxes. And the good thing with these boxes was that all your kit, you could just throw it into the river because they float. And that's how you can get across the rivers and there. So it was pretty wild. And the original idea was to fly in, land on the clandestine airstrip, which was built by the Papuans themselves. It was really cool. Within 2 weeks, they built a strip with 200 people, cut down trees, made an airstrip. And then when this was ready, I had a call. I waited in Australia. I got a call that I could fly out, and then we flew there. And so the idea was that the pilot will drop me at the airstrip, and I will stay there with a friend who actually was on the ground to prepare the airstrip with the Papuans, another Swiss friend. And the pilot flies back, and he comes, picks us up in 2 months. And in between, we make a film. That was the plan. And then unfortunately, what happened is when we landed, we realized the strip was too muddy because it rained before, and the plane couldn't take off anymore. So we lost the plane. And
so you were 6 months in the jungle.
And so I basically decided I stay, but the pilot wanted to leave. So my friend who was there to prepare the strip, he left with the pilot, and I stayed behind on my own with my, I felt if already I have all my kit here, I better make my film. And so I will see later how to get out of it. But first I want to make a film. And so that's what I did.
No wonder Ewan and Charlie hired you. So when you finish something like The Long Way Round, Long Way Down, Long Way Up, how do you compare its difficulty to like what you just described? You must feel a sense of elation and accomplishment and relief that you all survived. But on the other hand, it must seem a little bit mild compared.
Yeah, it's definitely much easier than what I did before. But the tricky bit is the length. It's like a marathon. So it's not dangerous in a way that like bullets are flying or you run through landmines and stuff like that. But it's still a huge challenge because you just need to pace yourself, your energy, your focus, your concentration. Every day you are moving. So that is a kind of particular skill, which you shouldn't underestimate. It takes quite a lot out of you. Usually at the end of these trips, you're like a zombie. You are completely yeah. And it's you have the danger element as well, because you just know the risk of having accidents where you kind of hurt yourself is always there. Every day is there, and so you really need to focus. You need to you can't mess around.
I was watching that footage you shot. By the way, congratulations on the footage. It was amazing with the drone, and that drone footage.
Yeah, that's new now. That's the new toy with the drone. You can. I love it. It's amazing because you're actually, even when you are there on the ground, you still start to discover new things, new aspects of the environment which you couldn't see just being on the ground. It's really beautiful.
Was that a DJI Mavic that you were flying?
The Mavic Pro, the one you can fold up.
Yeah, I have one. I love it.
It's really good.
As we're watching you go through those terrible roads like in Bolivia, and I'm thinking about, Charlie's got rods, he's half metal, the bionic man. If he goes down, this could be bad. I guess Ewan was worried about that too.
Yeah, very much so.
I was thinking about you too, because you've had a few crashes, and I didn't know how you were doing. And you had a petrol-powered Harley that you were riding through that, right?
Yeah. I was on a roadster, and I don't know who chose the bike, but I was just given a roadster. I think it was a good choice that I was still on a petrol-powered bike, which meant I didn't have to worry too much about this whole range issue which you have with electric bikes. So didn't you have problems getting petrol in Argentina, 5-hour lines and things like that? Yeah. You have, but that was just because my mind was somewhere else and I forgot to charge, to fill it up. and the tank is really small. And in one reason is, the tank is only 12 liters. It's really small. So I had a little jerry can for some extra fuel, but then that got nicked, and that's why I ran out of fuel a few times, because the bloody jerry can always gets nicked. And then you're in the middle of nowhere, and it was quite funny where Ewan and Charlie on the electric bikes had to go ahead to kind of find some fuel for me because I was stuck. So, but it was certainly the right decision that I was still on the petrol bike, because you can go fast, and when I can go ahead and set up a camera and they can pass by, or I can hang back and then catch up again because I can go fast. You don't have to worry about speed. Whilst on the electric bikes, if you want to do these long distances every day, you really have to watch your speed to make sure you don't kind of burn through the battery too fast.
That's interesting. I actually did a test of a Zero for a month. I loved it. But when I got on the freeway, boy, you could hear the electrons sucking down. Just
yeah. What's the range on a Zero? The one
about 125 miles.
Yeah.
Depending. If you get on the freeway, it can be as low as 70.
Exactly. Yeah.
So.
And with the Harleys, it was similar. So when they were kind of driving, not too fast, 60 miles per hour, I think they got like 140, 150 out of it. And the moment you go faster, then it just is less. So, yeah.
Well, congratulations on it. It turned out to be a really good story. Just the people that I hang out with, I'm data free, but the people that I hang out with say the long way round was great, fantastic. The long way down wasn't quite as good. The sequels are never quite as good as the original or something. And but the long way up, people are saying they're enjoying it as much as the long way round. And part of the story was, at least the people that I hang out with.
Yeah. Because it was a different beast. It's good. All three, they are different. But the long way up, it was definitely a different dynamic because of these electric bikes. That determined the nature of the trip. So every day you need places where you can plug in somehow, which means you cannot stop in the middle of completely nowhere. Whilst on long way around, long way down, on petrol bikes, you don't have to worry about these kind of charging stops. And so we had much more like camping, in the middle of nowhere. And on long way up, you didn't really have much of that, because you tend to stop in a kind of place where you have grid, where you have electricity. So you have houses, so you have a hotel or bed and breakfast. So it was less adventurous on that side. But then you had the kind of pioneering aspect of kind of testing technology, which was never used in such an environment, in all these different climate zones and in areas where it is not easy to find plugs in Patagonia or in the desert of Bolivia. And so it was just a different beast.
Plus,
but I really like it, and to always try push the boundaries and do something new, something different.
Yeah, I thought an interesting part of the story was that it was on electric bikes, and I saw Ewan said around episode 3, I'm a little concerned that is the story. And I noticed some people, the way Apple released it was episodic, timed over time. And so some of the people that saw the early episodes thought, oh, this is a trip about electronic bikes. But it turned out to be much more than that. And the electronic bike part just seemed to be mostly focused on the first 3 episodes.
Yes.
And then, then it was all kinds of, richness after that. So.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and it was certainly, there was definitely a worry about, Charlie's, kind of conditions and physical condition with all his broken bones and metal pieces everywhere, and so, we didn't really talk about it, but on the back of our mind, we were all we all knew, he cannot afford to have any falls, because if he falls, I think he had one or two little ones. Unfortunately, nothing happened, but it was obvious that he needed to be careful. But he's amazing. He never spoke about it. Absolutely not.
Amazing.
He completely pushes it away. He's incredible in that way, and he has a lot of guts. He just kind of yeah. And I'm sure he must have quite a lot of pain most of the time. He just absolutely, completely never ever mentions it. Just watching him when he walks, you just realize, it must be painful. When we went to places like Machu Picchu, to visit Machu Picchu, where you had to walk quite a bit, uphill and whatever, you just could see then, that was tough for him. Yeah. But it's cool to see that he's still doing it. He's not saying, oh, no, now I need to hang back. I'm not doing this anymore. He still has the guts to just push the boundaries forever. I think he will push it forever.
I did an interview with him about a month ago, I think, and had a great time. I can see why the chemistry between you and him and Ewan is so great, and that shows through in all your adventures. But the thing that he said is, after one of his latest crashes, it took him a long time to learn to walk again, and he could see the bikes out and wherever he keeps them, and he said, that was my motivation. I wanted to ride again. And
no, he's clearly very focused. He doesn't moan about things, saying, oh, why did this happen? And no, never. He's just looking forward all the time. And,
so you filmed his 2006 Dakar attempt, where he broke both his hands.
Yeah.
In fact, he said
I don't know anybody else who broke so many bones like him. It's crazy.
Yeah, and he told a story about that I think you blocked from your mind. I hate to bring up post-traumatic stress, but he said after he broke his hands, he went to the bivouac and he wanted to shower, and he couldn't because it was a bath or something like that. So he had to have you bathe him.
I definitely blocked it. Can't remember anything. No comment.
No camera was rolling for that one, huh? That's funny. So that brings up another thing. You and Billy Ward decided to do a great adventure. I watched it on Vimeo. In 2017, I think, and I think he wanted to go to Latin America or something. I've forgotten a little bit about that story, but you decided, no, let's go to northern Iraq and ride with the Kurds. And then
exactly
slippery. He crashed a couple of times, and then he said, I was tentative after that. I had trouble, I was wobbly on the corners and very tentative because those crashes get in your head, but they didn't in Charlie's somehow.
Yeah, somehow. No. Charlie somehow just puts it away. Yeah.
So what have you thought about what creates the great chemistry that you have with the whole crew, not just Ewan and Charlie, but you guys have been together, almost 20 years, I guess, doing these adventures.
Yeah, no, we're not always together, but we it seems to, I think that the key is obviously Ewan and Charlie. They like to ride motorbikes, and they came up with the idea. The first one, go around the world, and then Africa, long way down, and now South America, long way up. And somehow they managed to pick people around them who somehow fit to their chemistry. It's really primarily the chemistry, Ewan and Charlie, that's the key. And then we just somehow, and I'm quite happy, as in my job as a documentary filmmaker, I'm quite happy just to tag along and to be the kind of the observer and just not really interfere too much. And with Ewan and Charlie, there's always something happening. They tease each other. They have a lot of fun, silly silly jokes, and so there's always something happening, something to film, and it seems to work. I don't know, it's difficult to pin it down what it is, but it's certainly it's fun to do it, definitely.
I always wondered what was going through your head when they seem to provide opportunities for you to be on the camera. Like they were always buying some stuffed animal to hang off your Harley, which I thought was very cool. And then the camera would turn to you and you would just smile, but you wouldn't say much. And I thought, well, is this a true professional filmmaker trying to make them part of the story and him pulling into the back, or is he a shy guy, or what's going on there?
No, I don't know. I haven't been involved in the editing of the whole story. So whatever is ending up on the screen, then the other people are deciding. So I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't think I'm particularly shy.
So what drew you to the Kurds in Northern Iraq for that adventure?
It's I ended up doing quite a few stories in Iraq with the Kurds. The first one was in '96 when a Kurdish friend of mine in London asked me whether I would come along and do a story with him where he smuggles 4 of his brothers from Iraq to the UK as illegal immigrants. And I've never really heard about the Kurds before, but I was immediately interested because all these political stories, they fascinate me. It's like one of my passions, trying to figure out what's happening in all these corners where we only have bad headlines, but we don't have the experience on the ground. And then usually if you find a story where, a local guy has, to do something on the ground, that's where you get the good documentary stories. So this guy wanting to smuggle his brothers from Iraq to the UK, it was perfect. We got a commission straight away with the BBC. And it was the first time when we actually could film with little secret pinhole cameras. It just came, it was just kind of new on the market, and we could use these tricks. So this Kurdish friend, he filmed a lot of secret camera footage, and I was shadowing him outside, getting some extra shots. And so that's the first time I heard about the situation with the Kurds. And generally the problem there is after the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire kind of crumbled, all the borders in the Middle East were kind of redrawn afterwards. And unfortunately, the Kurds, which is a huge population of like 30 to 40 million, something like that, they were all cut up in different countries. So one group ended up in Turkey, the other one in Iran, one in Iraq, and one in Syria. They're all cut up. And wherever they are a minority and they get oppressed. And so like the big dream of the Kurds everywhere is to have an independent Kurdistan. And so this friend of mine who smuggled his 4 brothers out, he's like one of these Kurdish guys who constantly wants to have an independent Kurdistan. And through him, I started to have insights more and more into the problems, particularly on the Iraqi side. That's where he came from. And then I was involved in Iraqi films, as well before 2003, the second Gulf War. I was there when everybody was looking for weapons of mass destruction under Saddam. So I had different trips, and then when I met Billy Ward, I just felt, he's always going to Africa and Australia, all these easy places where everybody goes. We need to go to places where, it's exclusive. Nobody goes there. And I knew I have such good connections with the Kurds. And I just felt it would be fun to show him a corner where, hardly anybody ever would dream to go there for a motorbike trip. And it was amazing. It was so cool. It was really, really cool.
I
That's
love
so
it.
ridiculous. We ended up with police motorbikes.
I saw that. You got to play with the alarms and everything. Woo, woo, woo.
Yeah. It was just incredible. And because there were no other bikes around, and so the police just lent us 2 police motorbikes. What other country in the world something like that could happen? No, I wouldn't know any.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So when parts of Ewan and Charlie's trips are UNICEF ambassadors and so on, you get to fly into jungles and visit natives there. You get to visit with children stranded on the border of Colombia and so on. Those things must really touch you, given the kind of personality you have.
Yeah. That's always pretty tough to see what happens if people end up in conflicts, and it's really just trapped, and there's nothing they can do about it. And so on this South American trip, it was suddenly pretty crazy to see everywhere. You could see the refugees from Venezuela trying to get away from Venezuela because the economic situation is so terrible. They are starving, and if you are kind of a father with a young family and kids, and you just know there is no future for your family in the current situation in Venezuela, so you risk everything to get out of it. And then they all have the dream they all try to get to, or lots of them try to get to Chile, because in South America, Chile is known as one of the places which is economically kind of better off than other countries. But then, they get trapped along the way. So we met them, where was it, between Peru and Ecuador, at that border. And that's like one project we could film with UNICEF. And then you have these organizations like UNICEF who obviously specifically try to deal with some of the trouble spots. And usually they obviously always focus on the situation of kids. So medical issues, education, kind of tracing, bringing family together again. So that's it's always nice to see that there are people around who try to figure out how can you alleviate these dramas.
So Claudio, one of the things that fascinates me is you grew up in Switzerland. I don't think you even left Switzerland until you were 16, right? And then you went to Germany. Sounds like a fairly idyllic upbringing in Switzerland, and yet you have this great empathy for people who are trapped on borders, children, and so on. But I'm familiar now, I think, with what's happening with your wife. I hate to bring that up, and I'm sorry to hear that. I'd like to hear a status, but it didn't seem like you'd faced a lot of tragedy in your life. So how did you get all this empathy for people who
I don't know.
Did go through this?
Maybe because I grew up in a very sheltered place like Switzerland. I always somehow felt it's a little bit kind of detached from reality elsewhere in the world. And yes, you have like high living standards, you have good education, you have insurance policies for everything, but somehow it just feels a little bit detached and unreal. Particularly if you hear, you listen to the news and you hear about all these wars and conflicts and natural disasters elsewhere. And I just somehow wanted to actively, I was keen to experience myself and see myself what happens in these places where things are not rosy and more difficult. And why are people kind of killing each other in the name of religion or kind of ethnic tensions and so on. I just felt, I'm not a particular academic person. I want to feel it. I want to experience these places. Just sitting in a university, I started to study political science, but just reading books and going to seminars in a university is not the same than actually going out and kind of go to these places and discover the places yourself. So I somehow just developed that interest, and then I jumped into the deep end with this Afghan experience in '85. So I was 23 at the time, and after that experience, you just, there's no way back. You just and it was I haven't even finished university at the time, but I could sell the films, my first Afghan film, I could sell it in France. And then the editor of this news program asked, what's your next story? And I said, I need to go back to Switzerland to finish my studies. Said, are you serious? We need people like you. And so he gave me an assignment to go straight back to Afghanistan. And so I never looked back. And the more you start to see these areas, the more empathy I developed. I really started to, I'm very keen trying to somehow capture stories and, bring it across on a screen, TV, or now on the internet, and hoping that other people who don't have the opportunity to be on the ground, but maybe they see a film, if it's well done, if you can do your job as good as possible, then hopefully some of the understanding can be passed on. I don't know. It's always an abstract thing just to see something on a little screen. But I always try to bring, I always try to bring voices alive. The voices you never hear. We hear kind of American presidents every day, everywhere on all fronts, but there are like millions of people out there who probably would have more interesting things to say, but you never hear them because they're just wiped away. And I just enjoy that challenge to bring voices to people who are actually not in the headlines, but have a life like you and me, and it would be nice to kind of.
That's wonderful. You're one of my heroes. I've been in the photography business for a while, and one of the photographers I admire most is Carol Guzzi. I don't know if you know her. She still photographer, but a journalist who. Not for wars, but for natural disasters. You probably know more about her than I do. I'm casual friends with her, and she's won 4 Pulitzer Prizes. I think she's a journalist who's done that. And
incredible.
Yeah, incredible. And I just bow down to her. It's like, oh my gosh, giving your life to that. And she said it was her nursing education that gave her the empathy to have that kind of empathy to be able to tell that story. And she said the key to storytelling like that is the juxtaposition of innocence and tragedy together. And
and for me, I always liked I discovered if you actively look for contrasts in your life, whatever it is, it's basically, I just discovered it's really triggers your thinking, and it makes you reflect much more if you actively try to step out of your normal bubble of your own life, your own social circle, and then you go somewhere else, totally different life, and like that contrast with the Afghans, compared with the safe, cozy life in Switzerland, and suddenly you end up with Afghan mujahideens fighting in Afghanistan against the Russians. That was such a crazy contrast, and it suddenly triggers a lot of thoughts, and I was hooked, and that's what still kind of hooks me today. And I'm constantly looking for stories where I can play with these contrasts.
So my personal opinion from the long way up was the story that moved me the most. There were a lot of good stories in there, but the one that moved me the most was the story of Jamyan. Is that her name? How you pronounce her name? Ewan's adopted daughter.
Yeah.
Okay, and I guess you were running the camera to interview her, and she was talking about how fate, touched her, and she ended up, from an orphanage to being adopted by a A-list actor. And what a life she's lived. Can you talk a little bit about that story? I know it's Ewan's story, but
yeah, it's definitely it's obviously Ewan's story, but it was just nice to see that suddenly Jamyan kind of appeared in Long Way Up, because the very first time we met her was on Long Way Round, 2004, and she was just a little tiny baby in an orphanage in Ulaanbaatar, and where you have loads of problems with street children and people on drugs, and they have babies, and she was just dropped apparently in one of these orphanages by somebody, and we happened to do a little UNICEF story where we visited this orphanage, and then Ewan, he fell in love with this girl, and he apparently discussed it already before, generally with his wife, the whole idea of adopting children, and just having your own, but you could actually adopt children as well, because there's so many kids around the world in difficult situations. And so it was not completely out of the blue apparently for him, but for us at the time, we didn't even know exactly what he was organizing. He kind of didn't really talk about it, but he just started the process of organizing an adoption whilst we were still there, and now having this girl suddenly grown up, appearing in our last story in Long Way Up was beautiful, really beautiful.
It was beautiful. I was electrified by that story.
Yeah.
I just thought, it's
just
sets
cool,
up the whole range.
Ewan never ever mentioned it. He absolutely, he was not doing this for because it looks cool or something. Nothing. I think hardly anybody knew about it, and we were told as well not to mention it at all. It was never mentioned before. On Long Way Round, it was not mentioned. Long Way Down, it was not a topic. So it's quite nice. It suddenly pops up.
It's funny. The whole time I was watching this series, I was thinking, I'm not hearing too much about Claudio, but I want to be Claudio on that trip. That was, although there have been a few times when I've had my doubts when you've posted photos like this on your Twitter or Instagram or something like that. What was the story behind that?
I don't know where that photo came from. Somebody posted it, but I looked. I must have looked very similar because I had so much kit on my bike, and rucksack and yeah, it's just so much with all the cameras and batteries and chargers and the drone and it's always overloaded. The bikes are always overloaded.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I hate to ask this question. You don't need to answer it if you're uncomfortable about it, but you've experienced some own tragedy. You have a tragedy in your own life with your wife getting, is it Lou Gehrig's disease?
Yes, yeah.
What's the status there?
Unfortunately, that's just parallel to the whole development of the Long Way Up. I had the situation where my wife was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. That's how you call it in America.
Yeah,
motor neuron disease, and because different countries have different names.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's motor neuron disease in Germany, Switzerland. We call it ALS. Then in France they call it. I think again it had different names. Often the names they use are names of professional athletes, famous athletes, because that's apparently the kind of group of people who is at the highest risk to get this disease. and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, statistically, and first of all, it's kind of quite a rare disease. Not many people have it, but then the ones who have it, they seem to be people who are very disciplined, very active, and so the typical most disciplined people you can imagine are top athletes, who want to win gold medals and Olympia medals and stuff. So, they have to train, they have to be very strict. And interestingly enough, that can trigger reactions in your body where suddenly all your nerves start dying, because that's what's happening. So all your motor nerves, which you control with your mind, they start to slowly die. With my wife, it started with her left hand, and then, one hand, the arm, and then the next. You basically get paralyzed more and more. And eventually you lose your voice because, all the vocal cords don't function anymore. You can't swallow anymore. You need artificial kind of a tube into your stomach. It's a pretty brutal disease. There is no cure so far. There may be some medications to kind of slow it down a bit in progression. And so my wife was diagnosed in her first symptoms she had April 2018, and then diagnosed in summer 2018, where it was clearly defined that's what it is. And then it's a death sentence, and kind of life expectancies between 1 and 5 years. If you look it up in Wikipedia, that's what they tell you, and that's exactly what it is. For my wife, it was 2 years. So she died now in this year in 28th of April, 2020. So the incredible thing is, she was already in a pretty bad state when we started Long Way Up, September last year, 2019. And I asked her, what do you think? Shall I do the trip or not? And like always, it's, she never ever stopped me doing my projects, and she never ever said no, I don't want you to go and do a trip because it's too dangerous. Or here, she could have said, look, I'm already feeling too bad and I need you around because I'm kind of, I'm more and more handicapped. And she still said, no, you should do it. You should leave and do it because I have enough help around. One of our daughters, we have 2 daughters. The younger one, she asked for a sabbatical in university. And so she was then 100% around, which allowed me to leave and do the Long Way Up. And I knew, there was a risk that I might have to interrupt and go back. And it was really cool to see the whole team, you and Charlie, Russ, Dave, right from the beginning, they said, look, we know this is a risky operation, and you just need to know you can leave anytime, whenever it's necessary, you can leave. And so fortunately, it was not necessary. Actually, I could do the whole trip. Even so, Regina progressively, her situation got worse. And I knew, like in the worst case scenario, in my mind was that I come back before Christmas 2019 at the end of Long Way Up, and she probably can't speak anymore. And that's exactly what happened when I came back for Christmas last year. She could hardly speak anymore. Her voice was gone. And then the communication, the only way you can communicate is through a computer with, it has a camera which can read your eye movements, and so you can type with eye movements. But it's just cumbersome and it's difficult and
It suddenly ran out of power, and you were in the midst of that very touching story. Thank you for telling that. So she could no longer talk when you returned. She had to communicate by computer.
And so Yeah, that's just, but I just knew, that's the way it goes. And then eventually, with this disease, you eventually die because you can't breathe anymore. Because all the muscles, first the muscles which move your ribs, they start to be paralyzed, and then at the end it's your pharynx which gets paralyzed as well, and then you basically your lungs don't function anymore. So it's pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah, that's terrible. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But
she was she was incredible, and we ended up in London at the end, the last 3 months, from January 2020 up to end of April when she died. That was in London, and I was very impressed with the palliative care in the UK. Is amazing, very impressive, really impressive. Actually, much better than what we had before in Switzerland. It was interesting to compare, that kind of medical systems. Quite often, like in the UK, you have the national health, where often people complain because it's like for everybody is the same. There are no exceptions. Somebody who has money who can get a better service. No, everybody is the same. So sometimes, there are certain aspects where people always complain, but what we experienced with palliative care for Regina was very impressive, really incredible. And we were very lucky to be there. And we had a very special situation because the whole family was together. So like not only the one daughter who took a sabbatical at university to be able to kind of be with the mother full time, but then we had the second daughter as well. She could come along. So for the last 2 months, we were all together, and that was, quite unique. Probably doesn't happen for many people, where, if people die with cancer, you are in a care home or a hospital, you go and visit, but you always have a bad conscience. You think, oh, I should visit more, but there are other things you need to do, and your job and this and that. So there's always a deficit and a dilemma. Whilst for us, yes, Regina had a really very tough, difficult disease, but fortunately we could all be there with her, and it allowed us to digest it probably better than we had more time to digest it somehow.
And you drew even closer. You drew even closer to your daughters during this time, didn't you?
Yeah. And we all had different ways different coping mechanisms, which we just developed. Like one daughter, she was always drawing. She was just drawing the progression of what happened with her mother. I started to make little videos. What would you expect? And actually, just with the mobile phone, and that was an interesting experience. Actually, I started because I wanted to capture what my daughter was doing with the drawings, and I think, if for anybody out there, facing similar difficult situations, I think if you have a creative kind of skill, whatever it might be, music, drawing, writing, making videos like me or stills, I think it's a very good way to deal with the difficult situations in life. Just try and make something out of it, and that suddenly starts to have a meaning. And for us, suddenly, for me, it helped me a lot to digest the whole process. And I was surprised that even in this kind of tragic situation, you had a lot of beautiful moments, and you had fun. You because with this disease is, yes, your body gets paralyzed, but your mind is fully there. Your mind there's nothing wrong with your mind. And so, one way for Regina to rebel against the cruel, the cruel side of this disease is just to, to make silly comments and jokes, and it was incredible, really, really incredible.
That's
So,
really moving. Thank
yeah.
you so much for sharing that. That's really an amazing story. So I wanted to ask, I know we're way out of time. You've been so gracious, and I know it's late over there in France. I just wanted to comment, I can't wait to watch your documentary on the Jetstream. That seems,
Oh,
I wouldn't want people to end this thinking that you only document rides around the world and wars in the Middle East and rebels in New Guinea. That must have been really fun to make.
Yeah, as I say, I like variety. I like contrasts. You know, the bigger the variety, the more interesting. And actually, with what happens, you know, I was at the beginning of my career, I was mainly focused on political stories, current affairs stories, war zones, news reports, things like that. And then suddenly, out of the blue, I got hired for Long Way Round. So suddenly, a totally different type of film, which is, you know, adventure entertainment. And so the entertainment is the kind of the main aspect. It needs to be cool, it needs to be fun. So a totally different focus. Whilst before, with all the political current affairs stories, you only look at the negative side of humanity, everything that goes wrong. That's your story, which is unbelievably depressing over time. It's really tough. And then suddenly with Long Way Round, you know, you cruise around the world and you actually look at, you know, we look at a few kind of tricky things as well, particularly with the UNICEF projects. But generally, you enjoy discovering the world, but in a positive way. And that was a kind of quite revealing for me to realize actually, you know, there's there are actually more beautiful things in the world than bad things. And so, and then I discovered after Long Way Round, suddenly I got called with other people saying, I'm doing an expedition and I'm looking for somebody who can film it. And so, because everybody started to think I'm the expedition man. and so I said, and so I got involved in all sorts of expeditions, you know, mountaineering, you know, all sorts of things. And so one of the guys who called me up, that was in 2017, was this Swiss skydiver who said, yes, he heard about my name because of Long Way Round. and he was wondering whether I might be interested in his story. And so his story was that he, you know, all his life he was interested in anything that flies. So he was flying glider planes and other planes, and he was into, you know, kind of parachuting, skydiving, and he managed to establish a world record in speed skydiving. He reached, like in 2012, I think he established a world record, 304 kilometers per hour, like forward skydiving. And then he discovered, he suddenly realized that it's strange, you know, in our time when everybody is talking about renewable energy, we talk about solar energy, wind energy, all sorts of things. But with wind energy, you know, the maximum we can get is with these kind of wind turbines, which are, you know, not higher than 100 meters. I think the biggest ones are about 100 meters high, and that's it. But because he's into flying, he knows, you know, the higher up you go, the stronger the winds and the more constant the winds. You know, you know, closer to the earth, sometimes you have no winds, but if you go high enough, you have like constant wind. And then the top, you know, the top speed, the top wind power you would have in the jet stream, like 8,000 to 12,000 meters altitude. And these jet streams, they are only used by airplanes. You know, they get into it, so then they use less fuels if they fly inside the jet stream, because they are pushed from behind. So like from the US flying to Europe is always is faster than the other way around, because you can fly in the Jetstream. And then he found out that you have companies, startup companies, engineers, some clever engineers who started to build little prototypes to catch high altitude winds for energy production, electricity. And he felt he could combine his passion for flying, establishing a new world record of him being the first human being jumping into the Jetstream as a skydiver, and at the same time bringing attention to this new technology to catch high altitude wind power, which hardly ever anybody heard about it. I haven't heard about it before. And so basically I then made a film with him where we just did these two things. One thing, his preparation for this world record of being the first human jumping into the jet stream from a hot air balloon, and then and in parallel to his story, we looked at various new inventions, which is really fascinating. And there is a potential. I wonder how long it takes before people start to invest big time into it, because the prototypes are there. I filmed them, it works, and it's possible to do it. But somehow at the moment, it's very strange technological developments, what it takes to take off or not. And of course it needs serious investments. And at the moment I haven't seen it yet, this wind power technology taking off. But I hope it does, because it's kind of much cheaper, much easier than the traditional windmills. And so I like this idea of using my skills for this type of positive stories. So it's not just about kind of wars and conflicts, but actually some bringing some hope to humanity, that actually yes, we have lots of challenges, but you can actually, with a little bit of brain, good engineering, and the necessary political push, you could solve lots of problems. We could definitely improve all sorts of things, where at the moment we might create, suddenly on the energy front, we create a lot of problems the way we were doing it so far. And I hope we will, very quickly switch to more sustainable systems.
Well, that's fascinating, and it also sounds like really important to the future of mankind. Yeah. You've got a lot of other films too, like amputees hiking up the top of Kilimanjaro, I think, and so on. So it's just been fascinating to talk to you. I always wondered who this sort of, when I was watching The Long Way Up, who this sort of silent third member of the posse was. I realize there's a lot of members of the team, but you're going along for the ride, and plus I'm interested in the camera work and the drone and everything else. So thank you so much for doing this interview, and good luck to you. What's your next film project? We'll end on that question.
Yeah, it's I'm planning now to do more stories with Mark Hauser, the skydiver, because we felt it's such a cool combination, establishing world records and promoting some interesting new technologies. It's just a nice concept. And so we developed a whole idea of a series of similar films where we do world records and new technology stories. And we have like one lined up now for new inventions, how to use hydropower in kind of different ways, not just the traditional way we know, where we have a dam up in the mountains and the lake, and then a kind of a power line with a lot of pressure and the turbine at the bottom of the mountain. So that's the turbine we know, but there are new inventions how to have like little tiny turbines which just run in a river in front of your house or something, actually very effective. And so we want to promote these new ideas for hydropower, and combined with a world record in free diving, but not kind of in vertical down, but horizontal, somewhere in an area with a lot of currents in the sea, and then see how much we can do. Like the current free diving record, horizontal diving in one breath is about 250 meters, which is crazy.
Wow.
A Russian guy, but now we want to find out how far he can get if we get him into a big current, and to see, maybe he could get up to a kilometer, just to bring attention that there is so much power around, in terms of current, which is not used. We don't use it, but there are systems you could use it instead.
That's
of
fascinating.
Yeah.
So that reminds me, I used to be a kayaker a lot. I was training with the Olympic team and all that. And we went and rented kayaks one day at a fjord in British Columbia. Most people don't know there's fjords up there, but there are. And one of the areas we were supposed to stay away from is an area of saltwater rapids. Who ever heard of rapids in the ocean?
Yeah.
Because the big tide's up there, and when the tide comes up, it fills up the fjord, and there's this big rapid. And of course, I couldn't resist running that rapid, which I did in a K2, a two-man kayak with my daughter in the back and or front, and the waves were high enough they broke over the top of her head and froze her. And then we couldn't get back up the rapid because it was so strong enough. You have to wait I had to walk the thing around and everything else. And the fishing boats and other power boats, they couldn't get up the rapids either. There was so much power there. But you can run the rapids both way if you can wait for the tidal.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
do they have any tidal power plants in this area, or not at all?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
Tidal power plants. There are very few in the world. There's like one famous one in France, I know, and then it's not many areas, and it's that's one story as well, which we want to get into this new film. New concept of tidal power plants. There's one in Scotland which we want to show. So that's the plan. One of the next stories.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm going to go watch the Jetstream documentary now, and I'll look forward to the new ones. Thanks so much. Great to meet you. And
very good.
I'll send you a link, or have somebody send you a link. I don't think I have your contact info, but
brilliant. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye bye.
Wow, you made it to the end of that whole interview. Thank you so much for watching. Turns out when we contact guests and ask them for interviews like this, they often want to know how many subscribers we have. So if you want to help us get more guests, please subscribe and like. Thank you so much.